All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Yep, bring it on.
Okay, well, this time, we are going to be taking a look at offshore accounting departments.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, and we'll be going through a CPA Success Podcast episode.
Okay, yeah.
It's called Offshore Accounting, Building a Department in 5 Steps. And the big question that they pose is, can you really cut costs, like accounting costs, by up to half, like 50% by going offshore?
50%, that's a big claim.
Yeah, that's what we're going to try to figure out,
Right.
What do you think? Have you seen, I mean, obviously businesses are always looking for ways to kind of cut costs, be more efficient, but what are your initial thoughts on that?
I mean, obviously you have to look at all the details, right? Like, is it just salary or are there other components of cost savings?
Right.
But I think in today's globalized business, world, businesses are always looking for those more cost-effective solutions.
And not just cost effective, but also, time, like
Yeah.
efficiency, right?
Yeah.
The podcast really paints a picture of overworked in-house accounting teams that are just bogged down by all this, manual work that maybe they wouldn't have to be doing if they could focus on more strategic initiatives.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Think of all that time and brain power that could be, focused on other things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is often overlooked, right? It's not just about shifting tasks, it's about shifting your focus. What could your team accomplish if they had all of that time back? They could be analyzing data or forecasting trends.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like that's where the value lies.
Yeah, it's like trading spreadsheets for strategy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So the podcast specifically highlights India as like a place to go, a hot spot for offshore accounting talent.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, India definitely has some advantages. Like there's a very large pool of skilled accountants there.
Right.
Strong English proficiency as well. And they have a very favorable cost structure. So that makes them a compelling choice, I would say.
I mean, I've always heard about like the growing tech scene in India,
Right.
but I guess I hadn't really thought about it from the accounting services perspective.
But, it's important to remember that you have to do your research and due diligence because offshoring it requires careful consideration no
Right.
matter where you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to think about data security, quality control, how are you going to manage communication barriers,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, those were some of my initial concerns too, especially data security, dealing with people's financial information.
Right.
That's so important. And, I also wouldn't want to compromise on quality.
Yeah.
Like if the work's not good,
Yeah.
or if it's just a constant struggle to communicate, then what's the point?
Exactly. Yeah. And so one of the first steps really is to kind of understand your own needs and priorities.
Okay.
What are your non-negotiables? What level of control do you need over your financial processes? Yeah, because there might be some tasks that you need to keep in-house
Right.
because of their sensitive nature or regulatory requirements.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so once you have that clear picture of your requirements, then you can start evaluating those different offshore partners.
Right. So you kind of have to have a plan
Yes.
before you just jump into it.
You need a blueprint. Like if you're building a house,
Right.
you don't just, start building without that plan.
Exactly. Okay, well, speaking of a blueprint, the podcast outlines this 5-step process
Okay.
for building an offshore accounting department. And they call it realize, inquire, decide, select, and start.
Got it.
It seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but I'm sure there's more to it.
Oh, there definitely is.
Right.
Each step needs attention, for sure. Let's start with the realize step.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say, oh, offshoring sounds cool.
Right.
You have to think about your current operations.
Okay.
Are you experiencing pain points?
Hmm.
Is your team overwhelmed? And are you having errors or delays? Are you just looking for a quick fix without really addressing the problem?
So it's more about identifying like the why behind offshoring.
Yes, exactly.
Is it to drive growth and efficiency, or is it just a Band-Aid?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So once you've realized that offshoring could be a good thing for you,
Right.
what's the next step?
You inquire, and this is where you do your research.
Okay.
You start looking at different locations, compare costs, explore service providers.
It's kind of like shopping for a car.
Yes, just like that.
You don't buy the first one on the lot, right?
Exactly, exactly.
You got to do your research, compare.
Right.
Okay, and how do you even go about comparing costs?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because it can get a little tricky.
Right.
It's not just about comparing hourly rates. You have to consider the total cost of ownership. What about training? Communication, software licenses, travel.
Right.
Are there hidden fees, like project management fees?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Currency conversions. So you need to understand all those costs.
Yeah. It's like when you book a flight on a budget airline
Uh-huh.
and the initial price looks really good.
Right.
But then they hit you with all these extra fees for baggage and seat selection and all this stuff.
Exactly. And those hidden costs can really add up.
So it's about looking at the whole picture,
The whole picture.
not just the little detail.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've done your research, you've looked at the numbers.
Right.
Now it's time to decide.
Okay.
What are some of the big things that people should be thinking about when they're making this decision?
Well, think about those non-negotiables again.
Okay.
What are your deal breakers? Are there tasks that absolutely have to stay in-house?
Right.
Do you need a team that's available during your business hours?
Mm-hmm.
So answering those questions honestly, it'll help you decide if this is really the right choice for your business strategy.
Right, so it's not just about the cheapest option. It's about what works for your business, your company culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Okay, and then once you've decided that you want to go ahead with this offshoring thing,
Right.
then you have to select a partner.
You do. And this is where it gets really interesting because you are entrusting a very important part of your business to someone else.
That's a big decision.
It is.
So what are some things to watch out for? Like, how do you even know where to begin?
Well, I always look at their track record.
Okay.
How long have they been in business? What kind of experience do they have,
Yeah.
especially working with businesses in your industry?
Okay.
What do their client testimonials say? You really want to see that proven track record.
Okay, so it's kind of like hiring a new employee.
It is, yes.
You want to check their references,
Exactly.
make sure they're a good fit.
Exactly.
And then what about data security?
That is very important.
Right.
You want to look for a provider with those robust security measures in place, things like encryption, firewalls, secure data centers, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to ask those questions.
Right, yeah.
What are their data backup procedures? How do they vet their employees?
Right.
Do they comply with industry standards?
It sounds like you really have to do your homework.
You do.
You can't just assume.
No.
Okay, so it's about, like really making sure they know what they're doing.
Yes, and that you feel comfortable with them because
Yeah.
this is a long-term partnership.
Right.
You need to have confidence in their ability
Right.
and their integrity.
Right.
Okay. And then once you found that right partner, it's time to start.
Okay, so we've realized we need to do this. We've inquired. We've decided who to work with. We've selected them.
Right.
Now it's time to actually start.
Start that process.
Yeah, and I think that's where we'll pick things up next time.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the start phase,
Right.
how to actually get this team up and running and all of that good stuff.
That's the exciting part.
Yeah, so stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
We'll be back.
It's going to get more interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, welcome back to our deep dive on offshore accounting departments.
Yes. Welcome back.
Okay, so we're at the start phase now,
Mm-hmm.
but before we get into actually launching that offshore team,
Okay.
what about some things that could go wrong? Like, what if this just doesn't work out?
Right. Well, it's always good to think about the challenges, right?
Mm.
And offshoring, just like any other business decision,
Right.
has its complexities.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest concerns that people have is communication.
Right.
Because even if you have a team that's fluent in English, accents and cultural norms,
Right.
communication styles can all lead to misunderstandings or delays.
Yeah, like that time I tried to order a coffee in Italy,
Mm.
and I thought I was being so sophisticated with my Italian, but I ended up with a glass of milk.
Oh, no.
Communication is so important.
It is. It is. And, you can't just assume that everyone's on the same page.
Right.
You have to set up those communication protocols from the very beginning.
Okay.
Who is the point of contact for what? What tools are you going to be using for daily communication
Right?
versus project updates,
Right.
things like that?
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of video calls to build those relationships.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because sometimes just hearing a voice isn't enough.
Right. You need to see people's faces and their reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So communication, that's a big one.
Yes.
And what about data security? I mean, that's something I'm always thinking about, especially with finances.
That is a big one.
How can you really be sure that your information is safe when it's being handled overseas?
Well, this is where that due diligence comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the partner selection phase,
Right.
you've got to look for providers that have strong security measures.
Okay.
Encryption, firewalls, secure data centers.
Right.
Ask them about their backup procedures.
Right.
Ask them about their employees. How do they vet them?
Right.
Do they comply with industry standards?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
No, you shouldn't be afraid
Right.
because this is important.
Yeah, okay, so it's about verifying. Not just trusting, but verifying.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and then what about quality control?
Oh, that's a big one too. I
Yeah.
mean, how do you make sure that the work that's being done offshore is as good as the work that's being done in-house?
Right, you don't want to sacrifice quality just to save money.
Right. So you have to have a clear scope of work
Okay.
and establish some performance metrics.
Okay, so it's not just handing it off and hoping for the best.
No, definitely not.
You need to be very specific about what you want.
Right, exactly.
Right, that makes sense.
Regularly review the work, give feedback,
Right.
have a system for addressing any discrepancies.
Right, so it's like holding them accountable,
Yes,
just like you would with an in-house team.
absolutely.
Okay, now the podcast that we're talking about, they mentioned this company, Remote Accounting 24x7.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about how their offshore teams work. Just like an extension of your in-house staff. Like, they follow your processes.
Mhm.
They even operate in your time zone. Do you think that's really realistic?
Well, a good provider is going to strive for seamless integration,
Right.
but you also have to be realistic, right? There are
Uh-huh.
always going to be differences when you're managing a team remotely.
Right, especially across time zones.
Exactly. But the key is to choose a partner who understands those challenges
Okay.
and has a system for dealing with them.
Okay, so what are some things that, like, practical tips
Yeah.
that businesses can use to make this kind of collaboration work?
Well, communication, like we've been talking about,
Right.
is so important.
But not just any communication, right?
Right. It's not just about frequency. It's
Right.
about quality.
Right.
Regular check-ins, using video conferencing,
Okay.
collaborative tools.
Right.
All of those things can really help.
Keep everyone on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about the more, like, the human element of it?
Right.
Like, how do you build that rapport and trust
Yeah.
when you're not face-to-face?
That's a great point.
Because that's so important in any business relationship.
It is. And, even with all the technology in the world,
Right.
you still have to nurture those human connections.
Okay.
Encourage informal interactions.
Okay.
Maybe do some virtual team building.
Right.
Even just taking a few minutes at the beginning of a meeting to just chat,
Right.
get to know each other.
Not just talk about work stuff.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about building that relationship.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about Remote Accounting 24x7 specifically. Like, what makes them different?
Well, they talk about their vetting process for their accountants.
Okay.
So they say they have a really rigorous process to make sure that they have the skills and the experience to work with U.S.-based businesses.
Okay, so they're like an elite team.
Yes, exactly.
What else?
They also talk a lot about transparency and communication.
Okay.
So they offer real-time access to your financial data, regular performance reports, and you can directly communicate with your offshore team.
Right, so there are no surprises.
Right,
It's
yeah.
very open.
Very open communication.
And then what about flexibility?
Yeah.
Like, what if a business's needs change?
That's another area where they really try to set themselves apart.
Okay.
They have very flexible engagement models.
Okay.
So you can adjust the size of your team based on your workload or your budget.
Okay.
So if you're a growing company or if you have like seasonal fluctuations, that
Right.
could be really helpful.
So they can kind of grow with you.
Exactly.
Okay, so on paper, it sounds great,
It does.
but how do you know if they're really the right fit?
Well, again, this is where the inquire phase comes in.
Mhm.
You have to do your research.
Don't just take their word for it.
Right. Don't just believe the marketing.
Right.
Ask for references. Ask for case studies, client testimonials.
Right.
And again, ask those tough questions about their security protocols,
Right.
communication practices,
Oh.
quality assurance.
It's like dating.
It is.
You don't just marry the first person you go out with.
Exactly.
You have to get to know them.
I do.
Make sure your values align.
Right.
Okay, so let's say you've done all that.
Okay.
You've picked Remote Accounting 24x7 or another provider.
Okay.
How do you actually get this offshore team up and running?
Okay, so now we're in the start phase.
We're really starting.
Yes, we are.
What do we do?
Well, you have to have a smooth onboarding process.
Okay.
Think of it like you're welcoming a new employee to your company,
Right.
but there's a few added complexities because they're remote.
Okay, so how do you make sure that everyone's on the same page right from the beginning?
Clarity is key.
Okay.
You have to
Yeah.
define roles and responsibilities very clearly.
Okay,
Who is the point of contact? How are tasks going to be assigned?
great.
How are they going to be tracked? How will they be reviewed?
Right.
What are the communication protocols?
Okay, so it's like having that employee handbook,
It is.
but tailored to this remote team.
Exactly.
And what about training?
Training is very important.
Right.
Don't assume that they'll just figure it out.
Right.
You have to provide materials,
Okay.
use video tutorials, have Q&A sessions,
Okay.
maybe have someone from your in-house team actually visit the offshore location
Oh, interesting.
or vice versa, just for that in-person training
Yeah.
to build those relationships.
Right.
So it's an investment, but it's worth it.
It's investing in the partnership.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so the podcast, they talk about how this frees up your in-house team for more strategic work.
Right.
But how do you make sure that actually happens?
That's a great question.
How do you go from just taking busy work off their plate
Right.
to really letting them, use their brains and be strategic?
Right. Well, that's where things get really exciting.
Okay.
But it does require a conscious effort.
Okay.
You have to change your mindset.
Well,
You have to think about your accounting function not just as a cost center, but as a strategic partner.
I like that.
Yeah.
But how do you actually make that happen?
Well, start by looking at your business goals.
Okay.
What are your priorities?
Okay.
For the next year, 5 years, are you expanding?
Right.
Launching a new product?
Right.
Trying to streamline operations?
Okay.
Once you know those goals, you can see how your accounting function fits into that.
Right. So you're aligning everything.
Aligning, exactly.
Okay. So can you give me like a specific example?
Sure.
Let's say a company is trying to grow really fast
Okay.
and they want to get investors.
Right.
How could their in-house team, who now have all this extra time,
Right.
how could they help with that?
Well, they could build financial models and projections,
Okay.
create investor presentations,
Okay.
really showcase the company's potential.
Okay.
They can also work on strengthening internal controls, financial reporting systems.
So they're really becoming a key part of attracting those investors.
Yes, they become the financial storytellers
Yeah, I like that.
of the company.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, they're painting that picture for the investors.
Yeah, and that's a lot more interesting than,
Yes.
just doing data entry.
Much more interesting.
Okay, what about a company that's trying to be more sustainable?
Okay.
Like they're really focused on social responsibility and their environmental impact.
Okay.
What could the accounting team do there?
Well, they could develop metrics to actually track that environmental impact.
Okay.
They could analyze the financial viability of new initiatives.
Okay.
Are there new reporting frameworks that they can explore?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I never thought about accounting that way.
Yeah,
It could be a way to drive those positive changes.
absolutely.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's not just about compliance anymore.
Right. It's about strategy.
It's about strategy.
It's about thinking bigger.
Exact.
Okay, but I imagine making that shift.
Right.
It doesn't just happen overnight.
Takes time.
I'm sure the team needs some training and support.
Absolutely. Yeah. You might need to invest in some training programs
Okay.
to help them develop those new skills.
Right, like financial analysis and
Well,
forecasting.
exactly.
Yeah.
You have to create a culture of continuous learning.
Right, always be learning.
Always be learning.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up this deep dive,
Okay.
what are some final thoughts, some key takeaways that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that offshoring isn't just about saving money.
Okay.
It can be a way to transform your accounting function
Okay.
and really unlock your business's potential.
So it's an opportunity.
It is. It's an opportunity.
Not just a solution.
Exactly.
And if you approach it with a clear strategy
Right.
and, you've done your research, you have a good partner,
Right.
it can be a really good thing.
It can be a game changer.
Game changer. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we covered a lot of ground here. From the realize phase all the way to, actually managing this offshore team.
Yes, we did.
So hopefully our listeners have a good, place to start now
I hope so,
if they're thinking about offshoring.
if they're interested.
Yeah. So what's the most important piece of advice you would give?
Do your research. Don't rush.
Okay.
Vet those partners. Ask those tough questions.
Don't be afraid to walk away.
Don't be afraid to walk away.
If it's not a good fit.
Right, because this is a partnership.
Yeah.
It's not just a transaction.
Right. You're going to be working with these people.
You are.
And what if somebody's just feeling overwhelmed by all of this?
Right.
Like it seems like so much.
Well, don't let the complexity paralyze you.
Okay.
Just break it down into those smaller steps.
Okay.
Start by defining your needs.
Look-
Do your research on those providers.
Oh.
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right. You don't have to do it alone.
You don't have to do it alone.
Okay. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh, yes, one last thought. Don't forget about the human element.
Okay.
Technology plays a huge part in
Yeah.
offshoring, but it's the people who make it work.
Right.
So build those relationships with your team.
Okay.
Create a culture of collaboration.
It's a partnership.
It is. It's a partnership.
Okay, I think that's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
Building a successful offshore accounting department, it's not just about finding the cheapest labor.
Right.
It's about finding the right partner,
Yes.
having clear processes, open communication,
Yes.
and really using those resources to help your business grow.
Absolutely. It's a holistic approach.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've covered a lot, but hopefully it's been helpful
Hope so.
for anybody who's considering this.
Yes.
So if you're interested in learning more, check out the CPA Success Podcast episode that we mentioned.
Yes, definitely.
And you can also visit remoteaccounting24x7.com
Yes.
to learn more about their services. And remember, the most important thing is to be strategic.
Yes.
Do your research, be careful.
Due diligence.
Yes, due diligence, and build that strong partnership.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into offshore accounting.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Welcome back to the show, everyone, for the final part of our offshore accounting deep dive.
It's been a journey.
It has, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the good, the bad, how to find the right partner.
Yeah.
Now I want to get into the really exciting part.
Oh, okay.
How do you actually use this offshore team to grow your business?
Okay.
We're talking about more than just checking off to-dos.
Right.
This is about leveling up.
Leveling up, exactly.
So how do we make that happen?
It's a mindset shift.
Okay.
It's not just about delegating.
Right.
It's about a strategic partnership.
Okay, I like that.
So imagine, you've offloaded all those time-consuming tasks.
Like all that tedious stuff.
Right. To a capable team. What does your in-house team look like now?
Hopefully they're a lot more relaxed.
They should be.
Not working late nights.
No more spreadsheets.
Right. More time to think creatively.
Yes, exactly.
But how do you, it's so easy to fall back into those old habits.
It is.
And just fill their time with more busy work.
That's true. That's why you need to redefine those roles.
Okay.
It's a skill upgrade.
Okay.
They're not just data entry specialists anymore. They're financial analysts.
Right. They can actually use their brains.
Yes. Add value, not just crunch numbers.
Okay. So how do you even identify those opportunities?
Look at your business goals.
Okay.
What are your priorities for the next year?
Okay.
The next 5 years? Are you expanding? New product line, streamlining operations. Once you define those goals, you can see where accounting fits in.
So it all goes back to alignment.
Alignment, exactly.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
Sure.
Let's say a company is trying to grow really fast.
Yeah.
They want investors.
Okay, so in that case, the in-house team could build financial models, projections, create presentations to show investors the potential.
Okay.
They can also strengthen those internal controls.
Right. So they're making the company look good to investors.
Yes, they become the financial storytellers.
It's a much more interesting job.
It is way more interesting.
Okay. What about a company that wants to be more sustainable?
Interesting.
Really focused on social responsibility, the environment,
Well, they could track their environmental impact, analyze the costs of new initiatives, look into new reporting frameworks.
I like that. So they're not just number crunchers. They're helping to make a difference.
Exactly, they are.
But this kind of shift, it's not going to happen overnight.
It takes time.
The team's going to need training and support.
For sure. Invest in some training programs.
Okay.
Help them develop those skills.
Like financial analysis and forecasting.
It's like that, yeah.
And create that environment of continuous learning.
Always learning.
Always learning, right? So as we wrap up this whole series on offshore accounting, what are some final thoughts you want to leave with our listener?
Don't just think about saving money.
Okay.
Think about transforming your accounting function.
Okay.
Really unleashing the potential of your business.
So it's about seeing this as an opportunity.
An opportunity, yes.
Not just a quick fix.
Not a quick fix, no.
Okay. And if you do it right,
it
could really pay off.
It can change everything.
Change everything. I like that. All right. Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
A lot of information.
We talked about everything from the realize phase all the way to managing that offshore team.
We did.
So hopefully everyone listening feels like they have a good foundation now.
I hope so.
To start exploring this world of offshore accounting.
It's a fascinating world.
It is. It is. So if you want to learn more, check out the CPA Success Podcast episode we mentioned.
Great episode.
And you can also visit remoteaccounting24x7.com.
Yeah, good resource.
To learn more about their services.
Okay.
But the most important thing, remember, be strategic about this.
Strategic.
Do your research. Be careful.
Due diligence.
Yes, due diligence. Build that strong partnership.
That's key.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us on this journey into offshore accounting.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Until next time.
Keep learning and keep growing.